The golden light of 3 suns poured through the crystal walls of the royal palace on Lumina. Princess Vera sat alone by her window, her fingers moving across the raised patterns on her communication tablet. Unlike the rest of her species, she could not see the dazzling light displays that served as the main form of communication among the Luminari. Born without the specialized organs that allowed her people to perceive and project bioluminescent signals, she was considered disabled, or as her people called it, light blind. Vera's quarters were in a quiet corner of the palace, away from the busy main halls where important matters were discussed. Though she was the 3rd child of the High Sovereign, few visitors ever came to see her. The royal family kept her existence quiet, a fact that hurt more than their obvious disappointment. "Princess, the morning meal is ready," said Kelra, her personal attendant. Kelra was one of the few who treated Vera with genuine kindness. "Thank you," Vera replied, rising smoothly from her seat. Though she couldn't see as her people did, her other senses had grown remarkably sharp. She could detect the slightest changes in air currents, the faintest sounds, and even subtle shifts in temperature that most Luminari missed entirely. "There is also news," Kelra added hesitantly. "Your father has called for all royal family members to attend an announcement this afternoon." Vera paused. "All members? Even me?" "Yes, Princess. It seems to be a matter of great importance." Later. That day, Vera stood at the edge of the grand hall as her father, High Sovereign Zirin, addressed the royal court. She could feel the excitement in the room from the way voices buzzed and footsteps quickened around her. "The Council of Worlds has selected Lumina to host the first multi-species diplomatic summit," her father announced, his voice filled with pride. "Representatives from 12 advanced civilizations will gather here to discuss trade agreements, technology sharing, and the acceptance of newer species into the galactic community." Whispers spread through the hall. Vira listened carefully, catching fragments about the primitives from Earth and those humans who barely understand space travel. "This summit will showcase Luminari superiority and our rightful place as leaders." In the council, her father continued, "each member of the royal family will have ceremonial duties." As the High Sovereign assigned roles to each family member, Vera expected to be overlooked as usual. To her surprise, her name was mentioned. "Princess Vira will be listed as part of our welcoming committee," her father said, his voice noticeably cooler. "She will attend formal receptions, but not participate in the light ceremonies or negotiation sessions." It wasn't much, but it was more than she had been given before. Vera kept her face carefully neutral, though inside a small spark of hope flickered to life. Why include her at all? She heard her older brother Navan mutter to someone nearby, "She only embarrass us in front of the other species." Vira pretended not to hear, though the words stung. She had spent her life being underestimated by her family and ignored by her people. Perhaps this summit would be no different, but at least it would be something new. 2 light years away, aboard the Earth vessel USS Horizon, Lieutenant Chris Miller looked out at the stars streaking past the observation window. At 32 years old, this was his first major diplomatic mission, and his stomach knotted with both excitement and nerves. "Lieutenant Miller, report to the briefing room," came the announcement over the ship's communication system. Chris straightened his uniform and made his way through the corridors of the ship. The USS Horizon was Earth's newest diplomatic vessel, built specifically for first contact missions and interspecies negotiations. Though humans had only joined the galactic community 15 years ago, they had worked hard to prove themselves worthy of inclusion. In the briefing room, Captain Diane Ramirez stood before a screen showing the crystalline structures of Lumina. 6 other crew members were already seated around the table. "As you know, we're heading to the first multi-species diplomatic summit," Captain Ramirez began. "This is a critical opportunity for Earth. Many established species still view us as primitive newcomers. This summit could change that perception. She tapped the screen, bringing up information about the Luminari. Our hosts are one of the oldest species in the Council of Worlds. They communicate primarily through bioluminescent signals, though they can speak verbally for the benefit of other species. They value beauty, symmetry, and what they consider evolutionary advancement. Chris took notes as the captain detailed each of the 12 species that would attend. As a communications specialist with a background in adaptive technologies, his job would be to ensure smooth interactions between humans and other delegates. Lieutenant Miller, Captain Ramirez said, "You were selected for this mission because of your work developing communication methods for people with different sensory abilities. Those skills may prove valuable in navigating these complex interspecies interactions." "I'll do my best, Captain," Chris replied. "All of you will," she said, looking around the table. "Ambassador Greg Perry will lead our delegation, but each of you has been chosen for your unique skills. Earth is counting on us." After the briefing, Chris returned to his quarters to review more information about Lumina and its people. The more he learned about the Luminari, the more fascinated he became. Their light-based communication allowed for complex messages to be shared instantly across large groups, making their political and social systems unlike anything on Earth. Not one small note in the cultural briefing caught his attention. Luminari born without light-sensing organs are rare and generally kept from public view, as their condition is considered a serious disability. Chris frowned at this. On Earth, adaptive technologies and inclusive policies had long ago shifted the view of different abilities. He wondered how such individuals were treated in Luminari society, but there was little additional information provided. The ship's AI announced they were 48 hours from arrival at Lumina. Chris packed away his notes and prepared for bed, his mind filled with thoughts of the unknown world and people they would soon meet. As he drifted off to sleep, he had no way of knowing that on Lumina, a princess who had been ignored all her life, was thinking about the arriving delegates and wondering if anyone would finally see her for who she truly was. Neither Chris nor Vera could have guessed how their meeting would change not only their lives but the future relationship between their worlds. All that lay ahead, waiting to unfold when a human would reach for the hand of a blind alien princess whom everyone else had ignored. The grand pavilion of Lumina sparkled as delegates from 12 worlds gathered for the opening ceremony of the summit. Massive crystal columns reached toward the high ceiling, catching and splitting light into countless colors. For the light-sensitive species, the room was alive with communication signals flashing between the Luminari hosts. Princess Vera stood at the edge of the gathering, wearing formal royal attire that marked her status. Yet despite her fine clothes, most delegates passed by without noticing her. Those who did recognize her royal insignia quickly moved on after realizing she was the defective princess they had heard whispers about. Vera kept her face calm, hiding her disappointment. She had hoped this gathering of different species might be different from life among her own people. But it seemed that even here, she was to be overlooked. The High Sovereign's voice boomed through the chamber as he welcomed the delegates. "We're honored to host this historic summit," he said. "May our discussions strengthen the bonds between our worlds and illuminate the path forward." As her father spoke, Vera noticed something interesting. While the Luminari delegates flashed with excited light patterns, other species showed different reactions. Some shifted their weight, others made small sounds, and a few remained completely still. She found these differences fascinating. Her whole life, she had learned to notice what others missed, tiny details that told her more than any light display could. Across the pavilion, Lieutenant Chris Miller stood with the Earth delegation, trying not to appear overwhelmed by the grandeur of the Luminari world. Ambassador Greg Perry led their small group, with Captain Ramirez and 3 other specialists flanking him. "Remember," Ambassador Perry whispered to them, "we're here to establish Earth as a serious partner. The Luminary and others still see us as newcomers. Every interaction matters." Chris nodded, taking in the room. The light displays were beautiful, but also disorienting for human eyes. He noticed how some species seemed equally disadvantaged by the light-based environment, while others, those with enhanced visual capabilities, appeared right at home. As the formal speeches ended, delegates broke into smaller groups for the welcome reception. Servers moved through the crowd with drinks and food suitable for various biological needs. Chris found himself separated from the rest of the Earth delegation when an enthusiastic group of Zarvians engaged Ambassador Perry in conversation. Chris used this opportunity to observe the other delegates. That's when he noticed her, a luminary, female standing alone near a crystal column. Unlike the other luminary, whose skin pulsed with constant light patterns, hers remained still. Yet there was something in her posture that caught his attention. While others moved with flowing, almost dance-like motions, she stood differently alert, in a way that reminded him of people back on Earth who relied on senses other than sight. Curious, Chris made his way toward her. As he approached, he saw the royal insignia on her clothing. "Hello," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I'm Lieutenant Chris Miller from Earth." The princess turned toward his voice with a slight tilt of her head. "Earth," she repeated, her voice musical, but with an undertone of surprise. "You're one of the humans." "I am," Chris confirmed. "And you are?" A pause, as if she was not used to being asked to identify herself. "I am Princess Vera, 3rd child of High Sovereign Zirin." Chris bowed slightly. "It's an honor to meet you." "Princess Vera, you need not pretend," she said quietly. "I know why my family included me in this event. I am here to make up numbers, nothing more." Her directness surprised him. "I'm not pretending anything," he said. "Actually, I noticed you because you seemed to be observing the room differently than the others." This caught her interest. "What do you mean?" The other luminary watched with their eyes and those light-sensing organs on their skin. "But you—" He hesitated, not wanting to offend. "But I am light-blind," she finished for him. "Yes, I cannot see or produce the light patterns my people use to communicate." Instead of the pity or awkward withdrawal she expected, Chris simply nodded. "So you've developed other ways to understand what's happening around you." Vera turned more fully toward him, her interest clearly piqued. "You are the first person to recognize that," she said. "Most assume I understand nothing because I cannot see as they do." Before Chris could respond, a melodic tone rang through the pavilion, signaling the next part of the ceremony. "The light dance is beginning," Vera explained. "It is a traditional luminary greeting ceremony." Around them, the luminary delegates moved to the center of the room. Their bodies began to pulse with complex patterns of light that flowed between them, creating a living artwork that moved and shifted with their graceful motions. Many of the other species watched in appreciation, though Chris noticed some those with simpler visual systems seemed as lost as he felt. The human delegates and several other species became mere spectators to a display they could only partially comprehend. "It's beautiful," Chris said, "even though I know I'm missing most of it. Would you like me to describe what is happening?" Vera offered. Chris looked at her in surprise. "You can tell what's happening?" She smiled slightly. "Not from the light, but from the movements, the reactions of others, the subtle sounds of feet on the floor, the changes in breathing patterns of those around us. I have learned to build pictures from pieces others discard." As the ceremony continued, Vera quietly described the traditional story being told through the dance tale of how the luminary first reached out to other worlds. Her insights revealed layers of meaning Chris would have missed entirely. Other Delegates occasionally glanced their way, some looking surprised or confused to see a human in deep conversation with a light-blind princess. Neither Chris nor Vera paid them much attention. "Tomorrow, the real negotiations begin," Vera said as the dance concluded. "My role ends here. I will not be included in those discussions." Chris frowned. "Why not? What could I contribute?" she asked, though her tone suggested she knew exactly what she could offer. "At least, that is what my family believes." Before Chris could respond, Ambassador Perry appeared at his side. "Lieutenant Miller, we're gathering to discuss tomorrow's strategy," he said, then noticed Vera and added a polite bow. "My apologies for the interruption, Your Highness." "No apology needed," Vera said with practiced grace. "Your lieutenant was kind enough to keep me company." As Chris prepared to leave, he made a decision. "Would it be possible to continue our conversation tomorrow, Princess Vera? I found your perspectives illuminating." Something flickered across her face surprise, followed by what might have been hope. "I would like that, Lieutenant Miller." As Chris rejoined his delegation, he glanced back to see Vera already being ignored again by passing delegates. But now she stood a little straighter, her head held a little higher. For the first time in a very long time, someone had seen value in her different way of understanding the world. Neither of them could have guessed how important their conversation would prove to be, or how their growing connection would soon reveal secrets hidden beneath the dazzling lights of Lumina. 3 days into the summit, tension filled the air of the negotiation chambers. What had begun as polite diplomatic talks was turning into something more hostile. The Luminari and their closest allies had proposed new trade rules that would make it harder for newer species like humans to access important resources and technologies. Lieutenant Chris Miller sat with the Earth delegation, taking notes as Ambassador Perry tried to argue against these unfair proposals. Chris noticed how the Zarvian representatives seemed to be pushing the Luminari toward even stricter rules. Something felt wrong about their behavior, but he couldn't quite identify what it was. When the morning session ended, Chris found himself thinking about Princess Vera. They had met twice more since the opening ceremony, each time talking longer than before. Her insights into Luminari culture had already helped him understand some of the subtle signals he was missing in the negotiations. During the lunch break, Chris approached Ambassador Perry. "Sir, I'd like to suggest something that might help us." The ambassador looked tired. "Go ahead, Lieutenant." "I've been speaking with Princess Vera, the High Sovereign's daughter. She has unique insights that might be valuable to our position." Perry frowned. "The light-blind princess? I've heard she's kept away from important matters." "That's exactly why her perspective might help us," Chris explained. "She observes things differently. She notices patterns others miss." The ambassador looked skeptical, but nodded slowly. "We need all the help we can get. The Zarvians are somehow turning everyone against us. If you think she can help, speak with her. But don't make any promises on behalf of Earth." Chris found Vera in a small garden area away from the main halls. She sat near a fountain, her fingers lightly touching the water's surface. "The sound helps me map the space," she explained when he approached. "Each splash creates echoes that let me see the garden." Chris sat beside her. "That's remarkable." "Not to my people," she said with a small smile. "To them, it's a poor substitute for real seeing." "I think your way of perceiving might be exactly what we need right now," Chris said. "The negotiations aren't going well for Earth or the other newer species. Something seems off about the Zarvian delegates, but I can't figure out what it is." Vera turned toward him, her expression serious. "I've noticed something about them too. When they speak, their breathing patterns don't match their words. There's tension in their voices that suggests deception. You can hear that?" Chris asked, amazed. "When you can't see light signals, You learn to listen very carefully, she explained. The Zarvians are hiding something. I'm sure of it. Chris leaned closer. Would you be willing to help us? Maybe sit in on a negotiation session? Vera hesitated. My family would never allow it. They don't believe I have anything to contribute. What if I ask Ambassador Perry to officially request your presence as a cultural consultant? Chris suggested. Later that afternoon, Ambassador Perry made the formal request to include Princess Vera in the next session. The High Sovereign was clearly surprised, but could not refuse without seeming rude to the Earth delegation. When Vera entered the negotiation chamber the next morning, whispers spread among the delegates. She kept her head high, though Chris could see tension in her shoulders. He offered her a seat next to him, and she nodded gratefully. The session began with the Zarvian delegate Morik presenting new proposals. These security measures are necessary to protect established trade routes, he insisted. Newer species lack the experience to handle certain technologies safely. As Morik spoke, Chris watched Vera. Her head was slightly tilted, her attention completely focused on the Zarvian's voice. She slipped a small note to Chris. He's lying. Heart rate elevated. Breathing pattern irregular. Chris passed the note to Ambassador Perry, who read it with raised eyebrows. When it was Earth's turn to speak, Perry changed his planned approach. We understand security concerns, he said smoothly. Perhaps the Zarvian delegation could explain which specific incidents have prompted these measures? The question caught Morik off guard. He stumbled through a vague answer about potential risks rather than actual events. Throughout the session, Vera continued to pass notes about which delegates were being truthful and which seemed to be hiding something. Each time, Ambassador Perry adjusted his questions, catching several delegates in contradictions. By the end of the day, the unfair proposals had been put on hold for further review. As delegates filed out, several looked at Vera with new curiosity. The Earth delegation gathered in their private meeting room. Ambassador Perry turned to Vera with respect in his eyes. Princess, your assistance today was invaluable. How did you know they were being deceptive? Voices reveal what light signals can hide, she explained. The Zarvians claim to be concerned about security, but their real goal is to keep control of the rarest resources. When Morik mentioned protection, his voice lacked the harmonic pattern of genuine concern. Instead, it had the sharp edge of greed. The ambassador looked impressed. Would you be willing to continue helping us? Before Vera could answer, the door opened and her brother, Prince Nevan, entered without knocking. So this is where you've been hiding, he said coldly. Father is displeased, Vera. You were meant to observe, not participate. These humans are using you. Chris stood up. With all due respect, Your Highness, Princess Vera has provided insights that none of us could have seen. She's not being used, she's being valued for her unique abilities. Nevin's skin flashed with angry light patterns that only the luminari in the room could see. She has no abilities. She is defective. The room went silent. Vera's face showed no emotion, but Chris could see her hands trembling slightly. Your sister, Chris said carefully, noticed deceptions today that changed the entire course of negotiations. That's not a defect. That's a gift. Ambassador Perry stepped forward. Prince Nevan, I formally request Princess Vera's continued participation as a special advisor to the Earth delegation. Her insights align perfectly with our values of diverse perspectives. Nevan looked between them, clearly conflicted. Finally, he turned to Vera. Father will hear of this, but I cannot stop an official diplomatic request without creating an incident. He left without another word. After he was gone, Vera let out a breath. Thank you, she said quietly. No one has ever defended me before. Chris smiled. We just stated the truth. Your different way of perceiving is exactly what these negotiations need. As they prepared to leave, Vera stopped Chris with a light touch on his arm. There's something else you should know. The Zarvians aren't just trying to limit trade. I believe they're planning something more dangerous. When they speak among themselves, they use coded terms about a cleansing that will happen soon. Chris felt a chill run down his spine. A cleansing? Of what? I don't know yet, Vera said. But I intend to find out, with your help. As they walked together toward the exit, delegates from other worlds watched with interest. The ignored blind princess and the human who saw her true value were becoming an unexpected force in the summit, possibly the only ones who could uncover a plot that threatened the peace between worlds. The night was quiet as Chris and Vera moved carefully through the lower levels of the luminary capital city. Above them, summit meetings continued in the grand crystal towers, but down here, ancient stone paths wound through what had once been the original luminary settlement, thousands of years ago. Are you sure the Zarvians come down here? Chris whispered, staying close to Vera as she navigated the unfamiliar passages with surprising confidence. Yes, she replied softly. My attendant Kelra overheard them arranging to meet in the old temple. They didn't notice her presence because she was not important enough to register in their awareness. Vera's mouth curved in a small, knowing smile. Being overlooked can be useful sometimes. 2 days had passed since Vera had begun officially helping the Earth delegation. In that time, she and Chris had pieced together disturbing clues about the Zarvians' true intentions. References to the cleansing appeared in several conversations, always when they thought no one was listening. Yesterday, Vera had caught a fragment of conversation between Morik and another Zarvian. The device will be ready by the final day. The humans won't know what hit them. When they brought this information to Ambassador Perry, he was concerned, but needed more proof before he could make formal accusations. We can't risk an interspecies incident based on overheard conversations, he had explained. Find me concrete evidence. So now they were here, following Vera's hunch that the Zarvians were using the abandoned lower city for their secret meetings. Wait, Vera whispered, freezing in place. Someone's coming. Chris couldn't hear anything yet, but he trusted her enhanced senses. They quickly ducked into a recessed doorway. Moments later, 2 Zarvians walked past, their scaled skin reflecting. The dim light. The modified communication disruptor is almost complete, one said. Once activated during the final ceremony, it will not only cut off all Earth communications, but will plant evidence in their systems, suggesting they attempted to steal classified information. Perfect, the other replied. The Council will have no choice but to expel them. The humans and their primitive values have no place among advanced species. After the Zarvians passed, Chris let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They're planning to frame Earth for data theft, he whispered. We need to warn the ambassador. Not yet, Vera said. Let's follow them. We need to find this device they mentioned. They trailed the Zarvians at a safe distance, Vera leading the way with her heightened hearing. The path led deeper into the underground city, eventually opening into a large circular chamber. Ancient carvings covered the walls, barely visible. In the dim light, Chris and Vera hid behind a fallen column near the entrance. Inside the chamber, 5 Zarvians gathered around a table where a strange device pulsed with faint blue light. This disruptor will target the human delegation's communication systems, Morik explained to the others. But we've modified it to also inject false data packets that will appear to be unauthorized access attempts. When discovered, it will look like the humans tried to steal confidential information from all participating species. Why target the humans specifically? Asked one of the others. Because they're dangerous, Morik hissed. Not for their technology, which is primitive, but for their ideas. Equality among species? Valuing different types of perception and ability? If these concepts spread, Our position of dominance will erode. We must discredit them now, while we still can. Chris felt Vera tense beside him. Her hand found his in the darkness and squeezed it tight. We need evidence, Chris whispered. Something to take back to the ambassador. Vera nodded and pointed to her ear, then to a small device on her wrist, a recording tool she had brought along. She was already capturing everything. They listened as the Zarvians discussed the final details of their plan. The device would be activated during the closing ceremony, when all delegations would be gathered together. The resulting chaos would allow them to plant additional evidence if needed. As the meeting seemed to be wrapping up, Chris gently tugged Vera's arm, indicating they should leave before being discovered. They began to back away slowly. Just then, a small piece of the ancient column crumbled under Chris's hand, sending tiny fragments clattering across the stone floor. The sound, though small, echoed in the quiet chamber. "What was that?" one of the Zarvians said sharply. "Check the entrance." "Run," Chris whispered, and they both sprinted back the way they had come. Behind them, they heard shouts as the Zarvians discovered their presence. The narrow passages that had hidden them on the way in now became a maze that slowed their escape. "This way," Vera said, pulling Chris down a side passage he hadn't noticed. "There's an old maintenance shaft that leads up to the main level." "How do you know all these passages?" Chris asked as they ran. "I explored here as a child," she explained between breaths. "No one noticed me sneaking away. I mapped every tunnel and room by sound and touch." They reached a narrow vertical shaft with metal rungs embedded in the wall. "Up here," Vera said. "Quickly." They climbed as fast as they could, hearing the sounds of pursuit growing closer. Near the top, Chris pushed against the cover, but it wouldn't budge. "It's stuck," he grunted, pushing harder. "Together," Vera said. They both pressed upward, and with a grinding sound, the cover gave way. They scrambled out into a storage room in the main palace, just as the sounds of their pursuers reached the bottom of the shaft. Chris quickly pulled the heavy cover back into place and dragged a nearby container over it. "That won't hold them for long," he said. "We need to get to Ambassador Perry right away." They hurried through the palace corridors, trying not to draw attention. When they reached the Earth delegation's quarters, they found Ambassador Perry in a meeting with Captain Ramirez. "Sir," Chris said urgently, "we have evidence of a Zarvian plot against Earth." As Vera played the recording, the ambassador's expression grew increasingly grave. "This is worse than we thought," he said when it finished. "They're not just trying to limit our trade, they want to remove Earth from the Council entirely. We need to bring this to the High Sovereign immediately," Captain Ramirez suggested. Vera shook her head. "My father won't believe anything I bring him. He's never valued my input." "Then we go directly to the full Council, Ambassador Perry." "Decided. We'll request an emergency session and present our evidence." "The Zarvians will deny everything," Chris pointed out. "And they know we've discovered their plan now. They might move up their timeline." A sudden commotion in the corridor outside drew their attention. The door burst open to reveal Prince Navan, flanked by luminary guards and two angry Zarvians. "There they are," Morik said, pointing at Chris and Vera. "The human and the defective princess who are spying on a private diplomatic meeting." Nevin's skin flashed with embarrassment and anger. "Vera, you've gone too far this time." "Skulking around the old city with this human? Father is furious." "Brother, listen to me," Vera said, stepping forward. "The Zarvians are planning to sabotage the summit. They have a device that will—" "Enough," Nivan cut her off. "Your wild accusations help no one. The Zarvians have filed a formal complaint about espionage. Both of you are to be confined until the High Sovereign decides how to proceed." As the guards moved forward, Chris and Vera exchanged worried glances. They had found the evidence they needed, but now they might not be able to use it in time to stop the plot that threatened not just Earth, but the peace of the entire Council of Worlds. Morning light streamed through the crystal walls of Vera's chambers, where she had been confined since last night. She sat perfectly still, listening to the sounds of the palace, preparing for the final day of the summit. The closing ceremony would begin in just a few hours, and the Zarvians would activate their device unless she and Chris could stop them. A soft knock on her door broke her concentration. "Princess, it's Kelra." When the door opened, her loyal attendant slipped inside. "I've spoken with the Earth humans," Kelra whispered. "They have a plan, but they need your help." Vera stood quickly. "What's happening? Is Chris all right?" "Lieutenant Miller is still being held, but Ambassador Perry has demanded a formal hearing before the full council. He insists that both you and the lieutenant be allowed to present your evidence before the closing ceremony." Hope flickered in Vera's heart. "And my father? Has he agreed?" Kelra's hesitation told Vera everything. "The High Sovereign is ... reluctant, but the Earth Ambassador threatened to withdraw from the summit entirely if the request is denied. Several other newer species have supported Earth's position. So we will be heard," Vera said with determination. "Yes, but there's more. The lieutenant asked me to tell you that they believe the Zarvians will try to activate their device early if they feel threatened. You need to be prepared." Across the palace, Chris paced in his own confinement, a guest chamber now guarded by luminary security. Ambassador Perry had visited earlier, explaining their strategy. "We've demanded a hearing," the ambassador had told him. "But we need to be ready if the Zarvians decide to act first. Captain Ramirez is working on a way to block their device, but she needs to know where it's located during the ceremony." Now Chris waited anxiously, hoping their plan would work. The door suddenly opened, and a stern luminary guard entered. "The council has agreed to hear your evidence," the guard announced. "You will be escorted to the Grand Chamber immediately." The Grand Chamber was the largest room in the palace, with soaring crystal walls that captured and amplified the three suns' light. All 12 species delegations were arranged in a circle, with the luminary High Sovereign presiding from an elevated platform. Chris was brought in first and directed to stand in the center of the chamber. Moments later, Vera was escorted in as well. When she appeared, whispers spread through the gathered delegates. She looked different today more. Confident, her head held high, despite the disapproving gaze of her father and brother. "This emergency session has been called to address serious accusations," the High Sovereign announced, his voice cool. "The Earth delegation claims the Zarvian delegation is planning sabotage. The Zarvians counter that Earth, and ... He hesitated. "Slightly. ... My daughter, have engaged in espionage." Morik, the lead Zarvian delegate, stood. "These accusations are absurd. We have always been loyal members of the Council. Why would we sabotage a summit we helped organize?" "If I may," Ambassador Perry interrupted, rising from his seat. "We have evidence that should be heard." The High Sovereign nodded reluctantly. "Proceed." Chris stepped forward. "Yesterday, Princess Vera and I discovered the Zarvians meeting in the ancient temple beneath the city. They were preparing a device designed to disrupt Earth's communications and frame us for data theft." He gestured to Vera, who held up her wrist device. "We recorded their conversation," she said clearly. Her voice carried through the chamber, stronger than most had ever heard from her before. As the recording played, reactions rippled through the council. The Zarvians' faces darkened with anger. When it finished, chaos erupted as delegates began talking all at once. "Silence!" the High Sovereign commanded. He turned to Morik. "How? Do you explain this?" Before Morik could answer, another Zarvian delegation member slipped from the room. Chris noticed immediately. "The device," he called out. "They're going to activate it now." Vera tilted her head, listening intently. "There's something humming in the eastern wall," she said. A vibration that wasn't there before. Without waiting for permission, Chris ran toward the area Vera had indicated, ignoring the shouts from the guards. Vera followed, moving with surprising speed and confidence through the crowded room. They reached the eastern wall just as a panel slid open, revealing the Zarvian who had left and the pulsing blue device they had seen in the temple. It was already activating, lights blinking. Rapidly. "Stop him," Morik shouted, but his command was directed at Chris, not his fellow Zarvian. In the confusion, several guards moved to restrain Chris. Vera, however, was still largely ignored. The blind princess was not considered a threat. This was her moment. While all eyes were on Chris and the Zarvians, Vera moved directly to the device. Her fingers moved over its surface, feeling the vibrations, the heat patterns, the subtle sounds it made. "Vera, get back," her brother shouted, finally noticing her. "The main control is on the left side," she said calmly to Chris, who was struggling against a guard. "It has a different texture, smoother than the rest." Chris understood immediately. "Press the center and turn it counterclockwise," he called back, remembering the design they had seen in the temple. Vera's fingers found the spot and did exactly as Chris instructed. The device's lights flickered, then went dark. "No!" screamed the Zarvian operative, lunging toward her. But it was too late. The device powered down with a low whine. In the sudden silence, Vera stood tall, her hand still resting on the now harmless machine. "How did you know how to disable it?" a high sovereign asked, his voice betraying his astonishment. "I listened," Vera said simply. "I felt the vibrations. The device speaks in its own way, if you know how to understand it." The guards released Chris, who immediately moved to stand beside Vera. The council erupted again, this time with demands that the Zarvians be held accountable. As the Zarvian delegates were taken into custody, the High Sovereign approached his daughter. For perhaps the first time, he really looked at her, with something new in his expression. "You saw what everyone else missed," he said quietly. "I always have," she replied. "You just never noticed." 2 weeks later, as the human delegation prepared to depart Lumina, changes were already rippling through the Council of Worlds. New agreements had been signed, establishing more equal relationships between established and emerging species. The Zarvians' plot had backfired completely, strengthening rather than weakening Earth's position. On the observation deck of the USS Horizon, Chris stood with Vera, watching the crystalline spires of the luminary capital gleam in the distance. "The diplomatic exchange program is official," he told her. "Earth will send representatives to live on Lumina for a year, and Lumina will send representatives to Earth." Vera smiled. "And I will be the first luminary ambassador to Earth. My father has finally found a use for my unusual abilities." The council is already discussing establishing a new department focused on diverse sensory experiences, Chris added. "They want you to lead it when you return from Earth." Vera turned toward him, her expression both happy and a little uncertain. "It's strange. All my life I was ignored because I was different. Now I'm valued for the very same reason. Humans have a saying," Chris replied. "Sometimes our greatest strength comes from what others perceive as weakness." "Your people have much wisdom," Vera said. "I look forward to learning more of it." As the ship prepared for departure, they stood side by side at the viewport. Without saying anything, Chris reached out and took Vera's hand in his. She smiled and squeezed his hand in return. Behind them, diplomats from a dozen worlds watched with interest. Something new had begun here, not just between a human and a luminary princess, but between all their worlds. A connection based not on sameness, but on recognizing the value in difference. It had started with the smallest of gestures a human, reaching for the hand of a blind alien princess whom everyone else had ignored. And now that simple connection was changing everything.